I see this place as sort of like a mecca of literature.
A young woman, perhaps 20-something, is taking pictures inside the old City Lights bookshop in San Francisco. Protected as an historic site, City Lights is a shop of many rooms and levels. Up a narrow stairway is the office of City Lights Publishing, and a whole room devoted just to poetry. City Lights has been run for 50 years by poet Laurence Ferlinghetti, and the young woman with the camera is here as much to pay homage to Ferlinghetti as to buy books.
I'm from the East Coast, and this is sort of like a pilgrimage for me.
She's taking pictures of pictures, aiming her camera at group photos dating back 40 years or more. Photos of young poets, the so-called beatniks.
Ginsberg, Kerouac, Ferlinghetti are kind of idols of mine, in a sense. I mean, Ferlinghetti had the guts to challenge everything, challenge the establishment. I mean, we wouldn't have some of the writers we have nowadays if it wasn't for him.
Laurence Ferlinghetti was and still is a revolutionary. As a publisher, he broke barriers to freedom of the press by risking everything to issue controversial books like Allen Ginsberg's Howl. As a writer, Ferlinghetti turned generations of North Americans onto poetry.
Constantly risking absurdity and death, whenever he performs above the heads of his audience, the poet, like an acrobat, climbs on rhyme to a high wire of his own making, and balancing on high beams above a sea of faces, paces his way to the other side of day, performing entreshots and sleight-of-foot tricks and other high theatrics, and all without mistaking anything for what it may not be.
Tenderly lyrical, outrageously irreverent, and always accessible is how one critic describes the poems found in his classic volumes, Pictures of a Gone World and A Coney Island of the Mind.
And he, a little Charlie Chaplin man, who may or may not catch her fair eternal form, spread-eagled in the empty air of existence.
I'm Paul Kennedy. Tonight on Ideas, Edmonton writer, broadcaster, and artist Bob Chelmick takes us to San Francisco for a portrait of the poet, publisher, and painter Laurence Ferlinghetti, the man who calls himself simply the Last Bohemian.
I am walking up Grant Avenue through San Francisco's Chinatown toward North Beach, the Poetry District. Imagine a city having a poetry district. In fact, they even have streets named after their poets and writers here. Kerouac, Kaufman, Jack London, Dashiell Hammett. There's Rexroth Place and Via Ferlinghetti. And as I walk Grant Avenue, I'm looking for City Lights Bookshop and Publishing House, still run by Laurence Ferlinghetti, San Francisco's first poet laureate. I pass shop after shop of Chinese curios and the odd fresh produce and not-so-fresh meat market, and I'm trying to recall, did I first hear his voice from that rare red vinyl LP, or did I read his words in that $1 book, Pictures of a Gone World? I do remember that even on the Canadian prairie, so remote from this world that surrounds me this afternoon, Laurence Ferlinghetti's poetry spoke my language. It was witty, it was sexy, sometimes angry, often wild, and always engaging. It was not like the poems at school in 1965.
But after all, nevertheless, the world is a beautiful place to be born into, if you don't mind happiness not always being so very much fun. If you don't mind a touch of hell now and then, just when everything is fine, because even in heaven, they don't sing all the time.
He is the complete man of letters, poet, publisher, and bookseller, dean of the beats, author of enduring works of verse.
You just think of him almost like Lord Byron, just someone who was larger than life in many respects, certainly in terms of their talent, but who had that ability to communicate and to tell it like it is and to sound real.
The world is a beautiful place to be born into, If you don't mind some people dying all the time, or maybe only starving some of the time, which isn't half so bad, if it isn't you.
Certainly Ferlinghetti is an enormously witty kind of poet.
So Charlie Chaplin is a central figure in Laurence Ferlinghetti, the man who is humorous and defies the artificial structures of authority and questions them and mocks them.
The man who has been described by one critic as one of our own ageless radicals and true bards.
But in terms of his politics, I think he's slippery.
Oh, the world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't much mind a few dead minds in the higher places, or a bomb or two now and then in your upturned faces, or such other improprieties as our name-brand society is prey to, with its men of distinction and its men of extinction and its priests and other patrolmen.
He's like one of the wonders, just in terms of sheer durability and survival. But more than that, he constantly writing, painting, and he's the picture of health.
Yes, the world is the best place of all for a lot of such things as making the fun scene and making the love scene and making the sad scene and singing low songs and having inspirations and walking around looking at everything and smelling flowers and goosing statues and even thinking and kissing people and making babies and wearing pants and waving hats and dancing and going swimming in rivers on picnics in the middle of the summer and just generally living it up. Yes, but then, right in the middle of it, comes the smiling mortician.
It's Laurence Ferlinghetti who must be smiling, nearly 50 years after publishing that poem in Pictures of a Gone World. At 83, he still walks or rides his bike to work every day, and these San Francisco streets are often a steep challenge. This cable car, laboring up the hill on its way to Fisherman's Wharf, may be the visual icon for the city by the bay. Of course, there's the Golden Gate Bridge. But in terms of the printed word, Ferlinghetti's City Lights Books is San Francisco's, and some would argue America's, poetry mecca. When City Lights opened in 1953, this part of Grant Avenue was filled with Italian shops, not today's wall-to-wall Chinese import stores. But time changes all, and San Francisco has sure been the center of some amazing times. The Bohemians, the beat poets, the free speech movement, the hippies, the dot-coms, all come and gone, for the most part. But there is a quality to San Francisco's North Beach district that hangs on. And as I leave Chinatown and turn onto Columbus Avenue into North Beach, there is little doubt that this is still a haven for the artist, the poet, and the odd itinerant bohemian.
Hello there, my name is Sheldon Blake, and I am here in front of City Lights Bookstore, waiting for Laurence Ferlinghetti, here in the center of the universe at Broadway and Columbus, near the alley of Jack Kerouac. And I am selling my poems, 2 for $1. I have 4 of them. Lizards Jump at My Face.
Sheldon Blake, as he calls himself, is pushing 50. He stands in a long wool coat and poor boy hat, clutching a folder of photocopied poems. He has thick glasses, a rather wistful look to him, and the patience of Job.
How long have you been hanging out in front of City Lights?
Off and on for about 15 years.
City Lights.
I remember Lawrence would be behind the cash register and talk to him, and it was a very amiable place.
David Meltzer is a longtime San Francisco poet, a professor of poetics at New College of California, and author of San Francisco Beat, Talking with the Poets.
It may have been the first bookstore in America that just sold paperback books. And again, that was Lawrence and his partner at the time, remembering Paris in establishing that. It was a very small bookstore. It was also like a kind of way station for lots of itinerant writers and poets, and some of it would use the desk as like a mail drop or a mailbox, like a P.O. box, and so on. And often Lawrence hired poets to sit behind the cash register.
My name is Bob Rubin. I'm from Huntington Woods, Michigan, and we're at City Lights in San Francisco, California.
First time here?
First time here.
Why'd you come?
To see this bookstore and to maybe look around and find Laurence Ferlinghetti and buy the book that I have a copy of at home that I bought 40 years ago.
Coney Island or?
Yeah, Coney Island. And I remember a poem about a little dog, and it inspired me to write my own poem. Probably the one and only poem that I ever wrote.
Bob Rubin has journeyed to the West Coast to pay homage to the San Francisco poet, famous in A Coney Island of the Mind for his New York reflections.
Reading Yeats, I do not think of Ireland, but of midsummer New York, and of myself back then, reading that copy I found on the 3rd Avenue L, the L with its fly-hung fans and its signs reading, "Spitting is forbidden."
San Francisco's Laurence Ferlinghetti comes by his visions of New York naturally. He was born there, and much later hung out there in Greenwich Village.
Autobiography.
I am leading a quiet life in Mike's place every day, watching the champs of the Dante billiard parlor and the French pinball addicts.
Ferlinghetti's extraordinary life has been anything but quiet. It's the stuff of movie scripts, but the challenge would be to keep it from becoming melodrama, especially in the telling of his early life story.
I had an unhappy childhood. I saw Lindbergh land. I looked homeward and saw no angel.
Laurence was born at home in Yonkers, New York, into an atmosphere of anguish. His father, an auctioneer in Little Italy, had moved the family into the cultural melting pot of suburbia, but he died suddenly before Laurence was born, leaving his mother and 2 brothers destitute.
I am looking for my old man whom I never knew. I am looking for the lost leader with whom I flew.
When his mother's despair deepened, she was institutionalized. To Lawrence's rescue from across the Atlantic came Aunt Emily.
Emily Monsanto. She was French, Portuguese. But she was a flapper. This is talking about the 1920s. So she wore cloche hats and was quite crazy. I mean, I wrote a poem about her.
A real flapper with the high heels and the stockings and the hat and the beads?
I think so. As I remember, all I really remember is the cloche hat.
Aunt Emily whisked the newborn Laurence to France to live with her, and so Ferlinghetti's first language was French, a critical factor in his later years, both in the military and in poetry. Ferlinghetti didn't return to the U.S. until he was of school age.
I was an American. I am an American boy. I read the American Boy magazine and became a Boy Scout in the suburbs.
The French Aunt Emily took a job as governess in the mansion of a wealthy New York family. In the home's library, young Laurence was exposed to classic literature and poetry, and good food and care helped him grow strong. But his comfortable surroundings hardly made up for the next twist in his early fate. Emily Monsanto, the only mother he had ever known, walked away one day and was never heard from again.
I once started out to walk around the world, but ended up in Brooklyn. That bridge was too much for me.
At the age of 9, another traumatic turn of events. Lawrence's birth mother and 2 brothers showed up one morning at the mansion he now called home. After visiting for an hour, he was asked to decide, at the age of 9, where he wanted to live, with his mom and brothers, whom he didn't know, or the caring but unaffectionate rich folks he did. He stayed where he was.
I have engaged in silence, exile, and cunning. I flew too near the sun, and my wax wings fell off.
After the great stock market crash, Laurence was moved once again, this time to a loving family in the suburbs. He devoted himself to the Boy Scouts, yet began to run with the wild ones, too. He joined a street gang.
I got caught stealing pencils from the 5 and 10 cent store the same month I made Eagle Scout.
To straighten him out, young Laurence was sent away to boarding school in Massachusetts.
When I went there, it was a farm school, a work school where everyone worked the farm. We got up at 5 in the morning and milked the cows. And it was very hard academically. And it was founded by Dwight L. Moody, the Bible-thumping evangelist.
The Bible thumping was lost on young Laurence. He would grow up with a distaste for organized religion. But there was one impromptu philosophy lesson at the Mount Hermon Preparatory School for Boys that made a lasting impression. It came in a wrestling match. An older student, who would later become valedictorian at Yale, pinned Laurence to the floor to pose a pointed existential question.
We had an argument about how can you prove you really exist? And finally I had to admit I couldn't prove it. So then he let me up. But then when I went to Paris, I often saw Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir sitting in the Brasserie Libre. And of course I was a totally unknown graduate student at the Sorbonne. I wouldn't dare go up and say, "Est-ce que tu existes vraiment?" Do you really exist? So I didn't have a chance to ask him that, unfortunately. I had the chance, but I didn't have the nerve.
Ferlinghetti first went to France as an adult the hard way. As part of the D-Day invasion force, he captained a small naval craft.
I landed in Normandy in a rowboat that turned over. I have seen the ignorant armies on the beach at Dover.
During the war, he commanded a submarine chaser, and after victory in Europe, went inland, where in France, he discovered the work of surrealist poet Jacques Prévert. Prévert would have great influence on Ferlinghetti's own work.
I have heard 100 housebroken Ezra Pounds. They should all be freed. It is long since I was a herdsman.
Before he mustered out of the Navy, Laurence Ferlinghetti had walked through Nagasaki 6 weeks after the bomb that ended the war in the Pacific.
But I am the man, and I'll be there, and I may cause the lips of those who are asleep to speak, and I may make my notebooks into sheaves of grass, and I may write my own eponymous epitaph, instructing the horsemen to pass.
The years between the war and the 1960s were almost as tumultuous as his life had been before. But this tumult was self-driven. After a stint as junior journalist at Time magazine in New York, Ferlinghetti set off to follow his passion for painting and poetry. He studied at the Sorbonne and took on the classic bohemian lifestyle of the itinerant artist in Paris. And when he returned to America, Laurence Ferlinghetti headed for a city where the bohemian felt at home.
When I arrived in San Francisco from Paris, I was still wearing my beret in 1951. It was the Last Bohemians were still around then.
Back around the turn of the century, San Francisco thought of itself as the Athens of America, or at least of the West.
Ferlinghetti biographer and poet Neely Cherkovsky. We are chatting at Puccini's, a busy sidewalk cafe on Columbus Avenue.
We enjoyed being here because of the old bohemian tradition that went back to the 30s.
Cherkovsky is a poetry professor and the author of such books as Whitman's Wild Children and, from 1979, Ferlinghetti, a biography.
One of the first persons who became part of the Beat generation to come here was Ferlinghetti. In I think 51 he came here. He sailed across the bay and he talks about the city being like a little white city in North Africa, like coming into the harbor of Tunis. And he wandered up Market Street into North Beach, and he said, you know, it was the smell of the French bread and the aroma of the Italian wine. And it's...
You have it two vegetarian special?
Yeah. And it's still that way today. North Beach is still, thank you, dominated by that.
Away above a harbor full of caulkless houses, among the Charlie Noble chimney pots of a rooftop rigged with clotheslines, a woman pastes up sails upon the wind, hanging out her mourning sheets with wooden pins. Oh, lovely mammal! Her nearly naked breasts throw taut shadows when she stretches up to hang at last the last of her so whitewashed sins. But it is wetly amorous and winds itself about her, clinging to her skin. So caught, with arms upraised, She tosses back her head in voiceless laughter, and in choiceless gesture then shakes out gold hair, while in the reachless seascape spaces between the blown white shrouds stand out the bright steamers to kingdom come.
The Bohemia that grew up around here in maybe
Neely
the
Cherkovsky.
1930s, it was really a Casbah, which is what Laurence Ferlinghetti always called it. He said, "Hey, you leaving the Casbah today?" It really had that sense about it. We stayed here. We went from cafe to cafe. Around the corner from us is the Cafe Trieste, founded in 1956. That's where Ferlinghetti spent a lot of time. He hasn't for many years, but he used to come in there and have his coffee and croissant or whatever. And there were a lot of other poets hanging out there, and it's still a kind of a poet's cafe.
I was there first in 1948 when I got out of high school and worked as a carpenter's helper.
Musician, composer, and author David Amram.
And it was just an amazing, wide open, warm, incredible place.
Amram has been a chronicler, a collaborator, and a friend of the late Jack Kerouac. Kerouac invented the term beat for the so-called lost generation born between the world wars. He later despised the beat label, which would stereotype North Beach poets, but he embraced the term bohemian.
Bohemian does not imply moronic slob. The opera La Boheme by Puccini is one of the most popular operas in the world, and it's talking about a wonderful, free, warm, life-embracing approach that anyone can have in their life, even if you're working in a factory or when I worked in the post office. When I was done, and then I go home and write music for a while, I could go to the different places where Jack and I would hang out, and we could have that La Vie Bohemienne.
Bohemians, though, need day jobs. Laurence Ferlinghetti began reviewing poetry for the San Francisco Chronicle. In 1953, he went into business with a friend, opening City Lights Books. It quickly became the heart of the poetry district.
There was a great tendency to go over there and kind of hang out.
Poet Michael McClure.
There wasn't anything like City Lights anywhere else in any part of the world that I'd ever seen before. And you didn't have to buy a book, you could read a book, and none of us had any money.
Michael McClure arrived from the American Midwest in 1954, barely out of his teens, and passionate for the creative life as painter and poet.
One of the first things I noticed about Laurence, this would probably be before I read any of his poems, but when I first walked into City Lights, or at least one of my first trips in there, I was greatly taken with his paintings. And a number of his paintings were sort of like modestly put in corners or little alcoves in the bookstore, and they were extraordinarily beautiful abstract expressionist paintings.
Sarolia's women, in their picture hats, stretched upon his canvas beaches, beguiled the Spanish Impressionists.
So I'd see him sort of around the corners and edges of things, and then as I got introduced to people like Kenneth Rexroth, I ended up being invited to a reading that Laurence gave.
Until the last hot-hung climax, which could at last no longer be resisted, made them moan, and night's trees stood up.
Poetry readings and gatherings became a big part of the creative life of San Francisco, but it was poet Kenneth Rexroth who galvanized the community around other ideas.
They are murdering all the young men. For half a century now, every day, they have hunted them down and killed them. They are killing them now, at this minute, all over the world.
In the early 1950s, Kenneth Rexroth was the chief spokesman for what was being called the San Francisco Renaissance. He was a poet of protest, steeped in radical politics, and he had a platform. America's first alternative radio station, KPFA, Radio Pacifica. Kenneth Rexroth was an outspoken pacifist and an anarchist of the classic wobbly tradition.
Rexroth was pater familias for all the younger poets in San Francisco in the 50s and 60s. He had an enormous influence. I mean, he used to have Friday night soirees in his big old flat in the Fillmore district, which used to be totally black district. He had this big old flat above Jack's record cellar in this old Victorian building, and the whole flat was furnished with apple boxes in which were piled all his thousands of review copies. I'm talking about 1952, when I first went to his house. I met a lot of the poets there. But those Friday night soirees were astounding to me. I mean, I felt I really didn't have any education. Certainly didn't have any political education until I started listening to Rexroth. It was a total revelation. I mean, I was a good American boy. I thought everything was fine. It's only when I started listening to Rexroth giving me the position of the left in general, and that specifically the anarchist tradition. Rexroth called himself a philosophical anarchist. The press these days has given anarchism a bad name, so the general public thinks of an anarchist as just a bomb-throwing lunatic, and that's not what Rexroth had in mind. So it was really a complete political education, and then also he was very erudite. He could talk about any subject, and on his program he reviewed philosophy, theology, geology, astronomy, poetry, of course. It was that's where I got my real education.
And I'm waiting for the war to be fought which will make the world safe for anarchy. And I am waiting for the final withering away of all governments. And I am perpetually waiting a rebirth of wonder.
Laurence Ferlinghetti began to find a political voice in his poetry by the mid-1950s. And yet, for the first couple of years attending those Friday night soirees, Ferlinghetti hardly said a word.
I was too much in awe. I sat in the back, never opened my mouth.
And I'm waiting to get some intimations of immortality by recollecting my early childhood. And I'm waiting for the green mornings to come again. Youth's dumb green fields come back again. And I'm waiting for some strains of unpremeditated art to shake my word processor. And I'm waiting to write the great indelible poem. And I'm waiting for the last long, careless rapture. And I am perpetually waiting for the fleeing lovers on the Grecian urn to catch each other up at last and embrace. And I am awaiting perpetually and forever a renaissance of wonder.
I'm Paul Kennedy. On Ideas tonight, a portrait of San Francisco poet and publisher Laurence Ferlinghetti. It's by Edmonton artist and broadcaster Bob Chelmick. Laurence Ferlinghetti is famous for his reluctance to be interviewed, and he's legendary for extemporizing on the facts when being interviewed. It took Bob Chelmick months of gentle persuasion to be allowed to record Ferlinghetti's conversations, and while talking in that office above the City Lights bookstore, Bob was aware of the cautionary story of a French author who once took Ferlinghetti at his word. Seems that Ferlinghetti told the author that his Ph.D. from the Sorbonne was on the history of the pissoir, the urinal, in French literature. Story goes that the French author's book had to be revised and reissued when those facts from the Ferlinghetti interview turned out to be more of a spontaneous prose poem. As Laurence Ferlinghetti says in his poem Autobiography, I have engaged in silence, exile, and cunning. The Last Bohemian, tonight on Ideas. Here's Bob Chelmick.
Laurence Ferlinghetti may have been shy and slow to speak out for the first couple of years on the San Francisco poetry scene, but overnight he became its spokesman. Criminal charges were filed against him in 1956 as a publisher of poetry, and suddenly Ferlinghetti became an international symbol of the fight for freedom of expression. He was charged with making and distributing obscene literature, Allen Ginsberg's epic poem, Howl.
I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix.
Allen Ginsberg was another New Yorker who was drawn to San Francisco. Ferlinghetti had started up City Lights Publishing, dedicated to getting poetry into the marketplace, and he was there in North Beach one evening when Ginsberg performed Howl for the first time. It was an event that became a critical turning point in San Francisco's poetry renaissance.
October 7th, 1955.
Michael McClure.
At the Sixth Gallery. And we stood up and said what was so terribly outspoken in the culture, politically and socially, that it seemed to send shockwaves.
Who were expelled from the academies for crazy and publishing obscene odes on the windows of the skull.
About Howl and my poem, my first poem ever written about the murder of whales, and Howl, and Ferlinghetti was there. He didn't read, but he was there and heard it and determined at that point he wanted to publish.
Storefront boroughs of T-head, joyride, neon, blinking traffic light.
And publish Howl he did within a few months. A small softcover book in the City Lights' new Pocket Poet series. They sold for $1, they could fit in your pocket, and Howl quickly became a little book with a huge reputation, thanks to the obscenity charges laid against the publisher. The Howl trial of 1956 became a cause célèbre and an international media sensation. In the San Francisco Chronicle, Ferlinghetti called Howl the most significant single long poem to be published in America since World War II. And true to his awakening into philosophical anarchism, pointed out, "It is not the poet, but what he observes that is revealed as obscene. The great obscene wastes of Howl are the wastes of the mechanized world, lost among atom bombs and inane nationalisms."
Listening to the crack of doom on the hydrogen jukebox.
By the end of the obscenity trial, there were 10,000 copies of Allen Ginsberg's Howl in print. 1 million have been sold since. Ferlinghetti won his case. The boundaries for publishers and writers were pushed back, and both author and publisher became famous far beyond San Francisco's poetry scene. But, as is the nature of the mass media vision, reality became oversimplified, distorted, and North Beach poets became forever stigmatized with the beatnik label. David Meltzer.
The term beatnik was ascribed by a popular newspaper columnist in San Francisco, a man named Herb Cain, who had a daily column called Baghdad by the Bay. And it was filled, with gossip tidbits and three-dot journalism. And he's the one who was given the credit for calling the person in the black turtleneck sweater and beret and shades and goatee and probably, inflatable bongos in his pocket, a beatnik.
Sometime during eternity, some guys show up. And one of them, who shows up real late, is a kind of carpenter from some square-type place like Galilee. And he starts wailing and claiming he is Hep to who made heaven and earth, and that the cat who really laid it on us is his dad.
There's no doubt about it that the sense of cool that Charlie Parker and John Coltrane and people like that had was absolutely borrowed by the poets.
Neely Cherkovsky.
They hey, it's cool, man, and things like that. That all comes out of the parlance of the black jazz musicians. Ferlinghetti has a poem, and it's borrowed from Lord Buckley, who was a black rap kind of comedian of the 40s and 50s. And who spoke in this cool rap, and that was borrowed by the Beats.
You're hot, they tell him, and they cool him. They stretch him on the tree to cool. And everybody after that is always making models of this tree with him hung up, and always crooning his name and calling him to come down and sit in on their combo as if he is the king cat who's got to blow.
Once the media started pouncing on this idea,
David Meltzer.
Life magazine, Look magazine, Time magazine started coming in, and there were these national articles, each one further reducing the idea of the phenomena into more and more of just one-dimensional sort of comic book figures.
Only he don't come down from his tree, him just hang there on his tree, looking real petered out and real cool, and also...
Though he easily slipped into the lingo of the beats in a few of his poems of the time, Laurence Ferlinghetti is adamant he is not a beat poet.
Real dead.
I get associated with the beats by publishing them.
In fact, before he allowed me to record an interview, I had to promise not to call him a beat. Yet, in David Meltzer's recent book, San Francisco Beat, Talking with the Poets, Laurence Ferlinghetti is front and center, and the book is published by City Lights.
It's one of the professional stances of people who made their fame and their many fortunes off of the beat generation say, well, I'm not a beatnik.
Neely Cherkovsky.
It's a cool gesture. It's a good PR gesture. But it does bring up an interesting point. There were these three people, William Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, and Allen Ginsberg, and these three like-minded people met each other in New York City in the 40s and shared a lot of experiences, and they were all writers of one kind or another. And these guys got together, and then in 1950 they met Gregory Corso, the kind of the enfant terrible of the Beats. And they worked very hard at their writing, and they were not revolutionaries, they were great rebels. They were not anti-American, they were very understanding of America and its capacities and its values and its lack of values. But they were ultimate rebels. They believed the only way America could survive and grow and change and prosper and ripple across time is to allow for what Kerouac would later call the unspeakable visions of the individual.
The extra hours here, right?
So they put a name on it in the late 50s called Beats, Beat Generation.
Who put a name on it?
The monster media, you know.
And the monster media forever tattooed Laurence Ferlinghetti as dean of the Beats. He related to many of them well, not just as a publisher, but as friends and comrades, steeped in an understanding of classic literature and art, and in a growing political awakening in the era of Cold War paranoia, and in the rapid decline of the ecology.
Well, the beat poets were the first to articulate any environmental consciousness, as far as I know. And the main themes of beat poetry were really precursors of what became the main themes of the 1960s hippie counterculture. And so as if the beats were really stony.
We'll wait for that Harley to leave here.
That's really not Ken Kesey going by on his motorcycle. And as I was saying, the Beats were really Stone Age hippies turning toward the Far East and Far East philosophies, turning toward pacifism and mysticism and sexual liberation and generally anti-war. In a surrealist year of sandwich men and sunbathers, dead sunflowers and live telephones, housebroken politicos with party whips performed as usual in the rings of their sawdust circuses, where tumblers and human cannonballs fill the air like cries when some cool clown pressed an inedible mushroom button and an inaudible Sunday bomb fell down, catching the president at his prayers on the 19th green.
Here's another review of your life and work that I want your comment on. It comes from an FBI file. Beatnik rabble-rouser most surely responsible in some measure to demoralization in America.
But there's another sentence. Probably a nutcase. I got my FBI files through the American Freedom of Information Act. Yeah, I mean, it's almost as good as being on President Nixon's
wish list of whom he'd like to get rid of or kill.
A badge of honor?
Yeah, badge of honor. Honor or offer.
The wit is always at the ready, humor ever there in the poetry. It is, to a great extent, what makes Ferlinghetti a successful populist, a well-loved poet, a well-read poet.
Well-read, R-E-D, yeah.
His messages are serious, but honey gathers more flies than vinegar. His social commentary is always clothed in whimsy, a twinkle of the eye, a lilt of poetic rhythm. And all these comic manners Ferlinghetti learned from a master, not a poet in so many words, but a master showman, Charlie Chaplin.
Even though he was a dirty communist. He was run out of the country, you know, moved back to England or into Switzerland in disgust with American democracy.
What's your connection in terms of your work with Charlie Chaplin?
Well, he had an impact on everybody. I mean, he was a little man against the world. He was the little man in the derby, and the cane was Eros, the free spirit, the love spirit, innocent spirit against the cops of the world. His portrayal of the little man represented everything that fought against the fascist mentality and the powers of darkness.
Franco is dead, but so is Picasso. Chaplin is dead, but I'd wear his bowler, having outlived all our myths but his. The myth of the pure subjective, the collective subjective, the little man in each of us, waiting with Charlot or Pozzo. On every corner I see them, hidden inside their tight, clean clothes. Their hats are not derbies, they have no canes, but we know them. We have always waited with them. They turn and hitch their pants and walk away from us down the darkening road in the great American night.
It's broad daylight on this San Francisco street, and the writers' haunts are as busy as ever. Poets still gathering in Vesuvio's bar, the Café Trieste, or sidewalk cafes like this one, Puccini's, to talk about the latest ideas, to gossip and grump, to fire off broadsides at the usual suspects.
Our media is speaking with one Orwellian voice. And what happens when that happens? People are made, their minds turn into silly putty.
Out of the bright sun this morning steps an old friend applauding Neely Tchaikovsky's rant.
You don't even recognize your old friend.
Yes,
It's poet Albert Huerta.
How are you? I didn't see him.
They haven't seen each other in years.
Sit with us, join us. Good to see Albert Huerta. It's good to see you, Father Huerta. Albert Huerta was a good friend of many of the beat poets. He's a poet himself and has been teaching literature for many years. University of San Francisco, so here we are. So we were talking about Laurence. And
Albert Huerta is a poet priest in a Giants baseball cap. It's a real San Francisco moment.
And we're sitting here with one of the key Whitman-esque writers and poets of all time.
Thank you.
Neely Tchaikovsky.
Thank you.
What transpires next is classic sidewalk cafe connecting between North Beach poetry cronies, complete with heated repartee and full-on street theater.
I'm trying to call Laurence Ferlinghetti now to get him down here.
Oh, he's not gonna.
It's
He
ringing,
won't.
and it's ringing. Lorenzo, this is Alberto. How are you? I was going to invite you to have coffee down here at Cafe Greco or Puccini. I'm with Neely and this hotshot interviewer. You're laughing. You know, all of you are laughing together. I'm glad you have a good sense of humor. I mean, I just ran to Neely here. He was giving this wonderful disquisition, you know, and I had to start applauding him. Made me sit down and talk to this interviewer. Yeah, my class doesn't meet till 1. I got a free parking lot in North Beach. Would you believe it? Well, I'm sorry you have a lot of work to do because I was going to invite you to have a coffee latte down here or something. Okay, Lawrence, so listen, take care of yourself. And I hear the bell's ringing now, so that means everybody's getting ready to go to church. Okay, right. Take care of yourself. Okay, bye.
He's a priest.
I'm a priest. Yeah, Lawrence got deadlines, but that was him.
Oh, he's on a deadline.
That was private number.
Well, I have his number.
I call him now and then to be sure he's still there, you know. like that. You're
It's
right.
not about what is a beatnik, and Lawrence says he's not a beatnik, and yet he's profited
not.
so beautifully over it, And well, he isn't, and he is. That's the great magician.
No, he's bohemian.
It's wonderful, the Beat Generation. But one of the things that Lawrence has done in interviews for years is no one's done anything since Howl, and that is such an unbelievable imperialist crock. It's an awful thing. It's okay because he's speaking with candor as he sees it, like Whitman said to do, but it was an awful thing for people. It was an awful thing for me to read. Oh, the hell with you, For good God's sake, that isn't true. People are writing beautiful, spontaneous odes. What, did something happen suddenly that after 1960, suddenly people stopped having visions, or stopped writing, or stopped thinking, or stopped dreaming, or stopped making love, or stopped making hate, or waging war and peace? Bull crap. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. Where are Whitman's wild children? They're all over the goddamn place.
They're all over San Francisco.
And see, even Albert agrees with me. Gloria Patria.
And I do, and I run into them all the time, and they
Yeah.
always need a handout. They always need someone to
See?
take care of them. And they believed in San Francisco, which is a wonderful city that welcomed Lawrence and welcomed everyone, that this city somehow will shelter you, will give you solace, will encourage you, and it does.
I talk acerbically about Lawrence to you. I would be a lonelier person if I couldn't pick up Pictures of the Gone World or Coney Island sometime and read it. And I can even do it, and I imitate Lawrence, as you know, but Three people were sitting in the Cafe Puccini on a windy, cold Sunday afternoon, and one was a priest in a black SF's Giants hat. The other was a Jew in a New College black hat. The other was a Canadian in a black T-shirt, holding a very strange microphone in a very existential way, much like Sartre in a Montparnasse cafe back in the old days. And they were three very obvious people under a very obvious tree that seemed nude and alone on the sidewalk of eternity where no birds sing. There you go. So there's a Ferlinghetti poem for you.
And now, let us praise a famous man.
A packed ballroom at the Los Angeles Biltmore Hotel. It's a gala put on by PEN, the activist writers group. They're giving a Lifetime Achievement Award to Laurence Ferlinghetti.
It is not hard to fix Laurence Ferlinghetti in his rightful place in the literary firmament. He is the complete man of letters, poet, publisher, and bookseller, dean of the beats, the man who has been described by one critic as one of our own ageless radicals and true bards. A poem by Laurence Ferlinghetti. When I am old, will they accept what I say as the absolute truth and call me maestro and pin the cross of light on me? And if they do, oh, if they do, will it have been worth it after all the broken sentences begun again, all the illusory triumphs which could only happen on Sundays when all the banks are closed and the bankrupt churches open, and all the lotteries won, only to find the tickets printed with evaporating ink, and the last horse in the last race jumping the last fence to freedom, and I standing in the winner's circle with a wreath around my neck. Laurence Ferlinghetti, on behalf of your appreciative and readers and admiring fellow writers in this room tonight, I invite you to join me here in the winner's circle so that all of us may call you Maestro.
I'm proud of you, inspired by you.
The gala ceremony over, Laurence Ferlinghetti is surrounded by fans. This is his real winner's circle.
Yeah, do that.
Trouble you for an autograph, Mr. Ferlinghetti.
These are the people touched by his life's work, excited by the music, the rhythm, and the relevance, inspired, amused, and enlightened by the words and images that tumble from the pages of the best-selling books in the history of American poetry.
Laurence had an eye and an ear and a sense for what was important and what would have enduring value.
David Amram.
And Laurence, his poetry and his character are about enduring value. He's here for all time.
13th birthday?
Yeah,
That's my best audience.
I got his book, Coney Island of the Mind, on my 13th birthday, and it influenced my writing. He and Joni Mitchell.
He understood himself very well, a poet of a kind of a deep nostalgia.
Neely Cherkovsky.
And the sense that memory matters, and that maybe memory is one of the things that's at the heart of poetry.
I have to thank you for the fluidity of your writing. It really freed me to find my own voice, and I just want to thank you again for inspiring me in the 1960s to write poetry, and I'm still writing poetry.
13?
Laurence turned possibly hundreds of thousands of young people towards poetry through his poetry.
Michael McClure.
Because they loved it, and they loved the Charlie Chaplin odds of it, and they loved the little dance it was making, and they loved the sheets flapping in the wind, and they loved the smell of the fog, and they loved the funny twists of word and the little goat dances of sound.
It was charged with energy, and I was in modern dance because I didn't want to do physical education, and so I acted out his dog poem. I put on a collar, and I did a modern dance to his dog poem.
Did you bark?
I did bark.
I think they'll remember him much like we remember Charlie Chaplin.
Albert Huerta.
People say, we love you, Lawrence, like we love Charlie Chaplin. Laurence Ferlinghetti represents that spirit of the Charlie Chaplin, wistfully waltzing down the street, laughing at the world, but yet at the same time saying, hey, look at this. You can make a difference.
But after all, nevertheless, the world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't mind happiness not always being so very much fun. If you don't mind a touch of hell now and then, just when everything is fine. Because even in heaven, they don't sing all the time. The world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't mind some people dying all the time, or maybe only starving some of the time, which isn't half so bad if it isn't you. Oh, the world is a beautiful place to be born into. If you don't much mind a few dead minds in the higher places, or a bomb or two now and then in your upturned faces, or such other improprieties as our name-brand society is prey to, with its men of distinction and its men of extinction and its priests and other patrolmen and its various segregations and congressional investigations and other constipations that our fool flesh is heir to. Yes, the world is the best place of all for a lot of such things as making the fun scene and making the love scene and making the sad scene, and singing low songs and having inspirations and walking around looking at everything and smelling flowers and goosing statues and even thinking and kissing people and making babies and wearing pants and waving hats and dancing and going swimming in rivers on picnics in the middle of the summer and just generally living it up. Yes, but then, right in the middle of it, comes the smiling mortician. Take it away.
The Last Bohemian was written and presented by Edmonton broadcaster Bob Chelmick. Producer, Dave Riddell. The executive producer of Ideas is Bernie Lucht, and I'm Paul Kennedy.